Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 606 for October 14th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as spooky season is in full swing. And as we begin the show, Brennan, you know who had a spooktacular day yesterday, just absolutely horrific in every single way?
I'm guessing Mr. JD Duran.
That would be Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys did not have the best day yesterday because my Lions went into Dallas and whooped the believing Jesus out of them Cowboys.
That's good for you. Good for you. I'm still pulling for the Lions after they got wrongfully shafted and didn't make it to the Super Bowl.
Well, they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
They did.
On that one. But I will say this. The reason I bring it up, I know this is a movie show and we have lots of fun film stuff to get to. However, I have to bring this up because the world that we are living in at the moment is surreal. I feel like we have entered the multiverse.
Okay.
I don't know how to articulate it for those that are fans of other franchises in the NFL. But the Lions have been so bad for so many years, for most of my life, that even when they have been good, they haven't been great. They haven't been Super Bowl contenders. Yeah, they've been passable. There's been, I think we've talked about this before. The Lions have made the playoffs like 3 times in my lifetime.
For sure.
And, last year for the
it was very recently,
game,
right?
yeah, like last year was the first time they got to the NFC Championship game since like 1993 or whatever. Most of my life, they've been abysmal. The first team to go 0-16, ironically, after going 4-0 in the preseason that year, just to make it all the more laughable.
Sure.
They've just been so bad, so bad that I wake up now in 2024 and I hear all of these analysts, talking heads, experts, ex-players of the game, whoever it may be. So many people are talking about the Detroit Lions, my Lions, as maybe the best team in the NFL right now. Super Bowl contenders. I struggle to wrap my mind around that.
You are living in the multiverse.
It's hard for me to fathom.
You are living in the multiverse right now. It must feel good. It must feel good.
It does feel good.
I'm seeing a lot of those same narratives right now. Seeing a lot of narratives, especially for people talking positively about Jared Goff as well.
Yeah.
I've been hearing some. It's very multiversal like in a way.
Yeah. It's been incredible just to wake up and hear people talk about, like, I read it or I hear it and I struggle to compute.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. Say that one more time. Say it slowly. Super Bowl what? like contenders? Like it blows my mind.
You need a replacement for when Michigan is not doing as well as you would like.
Well, and that's the problem. Yeah. Like Michigan, obviously, they were always going to have a down year this year.
Yeah, it was a rough transition period for
the context of last year. But the Lions, taking that mantle and my football life, and it's been really fun to see. And for them to walk into Dallas and essentially play with their food. I don't know if you watched the game, Brennan. I assume
I did not.
You didn't.
No, I did not.
But the Lions had a vendetta against Dallas. I think partially because everyone, if you're not a Cowboys fan, you're anti-Cowboys.
You kind of hate the Cowboys, right?
Like that's
just one of those franchises you hate if you don't like them, right?
Yeah, it's like if you're not a Yankees fan, you just hate the Yankees. Yeah, it's like one of those things.
Yeah.
But also there was a situation last year where the Lions felt like they got screwed when playing against the Cowboys. So they came in to this game, not only to win, but to completely disrespect the Cowboys. They were up like 30-6, and they were not slowing down. They were pulling out all the stops, all the trick plays. Brendan, I'm not even kidding. They were up like 36-6 or whatever the score was. They were up by like 30 points.
Yeah.
They were on like the 10-yard line about to score again, and they run a hook and ladder with their right tackle, an offensive lineman. They run a hook and ladder with the offensive lineman, and he would have scored, but there was a penalty on the play, and so he came back. But like, that's the kind of clownery that they were throwing at the Cowboys. It was hysterical. I've never seen anything like it.
I did see a few replays, just a few snippets. I was out and about. My wife and I just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. In fact, as we're recording this, it is our 1-year anniversary.
Yeah,
today.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
very
you. Just
fun.
had to throw a plug there to my lovely Maris. But we were out and about in downtown Westchester. For those who are familiar with the greater Philadelphia area, it's a beautiful urban-like village that's very close to the city. But we went to a few bars, went out to dinner. Obviously, the games were all on because it's just what you do on a Sunday, right?
Yeah.
But people are obviously gravitating towards the Philadelphia Eagles, who did have a victory as well. Same with the Steelers. So at least Pennsylvania had a good representative effort as well. But I will say your Lions were probably, from what I've seen, the talk of the football weekend.
Oh my gosh, people were talking like, and again, it's not just that they won, but they just absolutely clowned the Cowboys, which was hilarious to me. The visual of the game for me, aside from running a hook and ladder with your right tackle, they put out at wide receiver one of their offensive linemen.
That's just so weird.
It was hilarious. They had a lineman running actual routes in an actual NFL game. Not as a joke. It wasn't like the Globetrotter situation or a preseason game. In an actual NFL game, we put out the left tackle and had him run a route as a right receiver.
So weird.
They just did not respect the Cowboys at all. It was hilarious.
That'd be like trying to get Jared to do some type of tight end maneuver or something like that. It doesn't
so
compute.
Funny.
Yeah,
I laughed so hard during that whole affair. The only downside to it is one of, if not the best defensive player in the league, broke his leg with Aiden Hutchinson. That was absolutely heartbreaking to see.
Yeah.
So it was bittersweet. It was a very bittersweet afternoon in that regard. I mean, you love to win. The way they won was a lot of fun. But
that's the thing. Yeah,
snapping his leg, man.
I mean, a win is a win for sure, but the way that a team wins is sometimes more important, especially when it comes to rankings. I think, especially with regard to college football now, the way that certain teams are winning, I think, should be talked about a lot more than the actual rankings now are suggesting, which is a completely different conversation than what we're having here. But it just goes to show the way that a team wins it's a worthwhile narrative. It really is.
Absolutely. Speaking of worthwhile narratives, let's talk about Joker. Let's get into that.
It's a worthwhile narrative, but maybe not in the best way.
Not in the best way. So we noted last week when we were entering into our opening segment, as we do, is the parade on or off. Joker, fully ado, did not have the hottest of starts. And they came out of their second weekend with an 81% drop.
That is unprecedented.
Not good.
That is so bad. That is so bad. And worldwide, I think it was like 75%. So even the international markets couldn't save this thing either. This is
dead.
Really, this
Absolutely.
is going to be a story. This is going to be something that gets studied in film marketing classes, I think.
Yeah. We noted that the budget was somewhere around what, $200 million?
200 million, something like that.
Recall.
Yeah.
And worldwide it's sitting at 164. It might make its money back, maybe. I guess. Well, the 200 probably doesn't include marketing, so
no. I think at this point, I was seeing some stats on it. Some people giving a bit more of a detailed description on what's going wrong with Joker. And I think at this point now, it needs to make like an additional 230 million just to break even.
That makes sense. That makes sense when you include all of the marketing and extracurricular costs involved.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's obviously not going to get there.
No, this is a
not
failure.
even gonna
This is a
come close.
massive failure, to put
It's
it
a
lightly.
massive failure in every regard. And I think what's interesting is that it comes in fourth here on the box office.
Mm-hmm.
In third place was Beetlejuice in its sixth week.
You know,
Its sixth week
it's
beats
so-
Joker in its second weekend.
This is so interesting because the estimated top 5 domestically before we actually got this published list that you're reading now actually had Joker at number 3 and Beetlejuice at number 4. I think it was only separated by like $4,000. So it's even funnier that in its second weekend they can't even claim top 3 status for Joker.
No,
like,
they can't.
Warner Brothers can't even do that.
No, and they lose to a film in its sixth weekend. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think to add other context to it as well is that Transformers 1, which finished the weekend in sixth place, was in its fourth weekend, and Transformers 1 didn't necessarily come out and destroy the box office the way The Wild Robot did.
Right.
It has done okay. I don't think it's going to quite make its money back in the theatrical space when you couple it with its digital premium VOD rentals. Maybe it'll be able to crack even. That's the hope anyway. However, I bring up Transformers 1 to say that in its fourth weekend, an animated film that has somewhat struggled was halfway to Joker at $3.8 million. Like, it was halfway to Joker Folie à Deux in its second weekend. And that additional context, I think, really puts into perspective how much of a failure this film has been at the box office.
That
is
81% is one of the most significant second weekend drop-offs that we can really talk about here. Like, I don't know what it has to compete with as far as what kind of records that it holds by comparison to other films that had a similar drop-off like that, but that is one of the worst. That is so bad. It's a tragic thing to see that just from a movie, going experience in a generality.
Yeah, it's not great. And I know we talked about this last week, but much of the blame also goes to Warner Brothers and the way they marketed that film. And perhaps there was
marketing for it.
Fair enough. Clearly, they didn't see a way to market that film.
Yeah, they did not.
Because it wasn't great if it was there. I feel like it was non-existent mostly, especially compared to that first film. It felt like the marketing for that first Joker was prominent. It was everywhere. It was inescapable. And as a result, the discourse on social media was even more of a hellscape. But this time around, it just feels like, people had their sentiments, their reviews, their opinions on Joker Folie à Deux, but the discourse wasn't not nearly as rabid as the first film was. It just felt like the film fizzled out quickly.
Well,
even in terms of the social media conversation,
maybe
felt so much more dry this time around.
Maybe that's reflective of the film. We talked about how it just seemed to lack conviction by comparison to its predecessor. And the fact that that first film at least tried to provoke a conversation of some sort, whether it was good or bad, perhaps that was also the thing that gave it some legs, right? That gave it some momentum. And this next film, Folie à Deux, just doesn't have that same type of commitment to that, conversation starting aspect, right? And I think as such, it's fizzling out before it has a chance to do any legs whatsoever.
Which is also to say its awards potential is completely
There's nothing
out the
there.
window.
There's absolutely
it's
nothing there
done.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I could see maybe competing is the score, because I do think it's really great. And the Academy clearly loved the score for the first film.
Yeah.
And I do think the score to this film, to Folie à Deux, is equally fantastic. I could see the Academy going for it in score. Maybe Gaga in song. Simply
I think
because
that's about it.
of
Yeah,
the Lady
not,
Gaga
obviously
aspect
not
of it.
for
So
performance.
yeah, not for performance, but for song. I could
For
see
song, I
song and
think-
score being in play. Maybe makeup.
I don't even know if I'm gonna. I don't even think I see
don't
that
know.
at this point.
I don't either. I'm very much reaching here.
Yeah,
But
it might get nothing.
Yeah.
It might get nothing.
It might not
at
get
this
nothing.
point. Yeah.
I think there's a real possibility it gets nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see a world where score, maybe song, is in play. Not much beyond that though.
Nope. I'm with you. Oh man, this film's dead in the water.
A film that I do hope has major awards potential, though, is The Wild Robot. And The Wild Robot almost took the box office with $14 million in its third weekend. Terrifier 3 coming in first place with $14.1 million.
Very close call.
Very close call. And given the legs of Terrifier 2 and how well that ended up doing, I don't think it's too much of a surprise to see it do well here, especially because the reviews have been pretty great. I've heard a lot of people.
Base. It has a fan base, and it's pleasing that fan base still. It's committing to that. It knows its audience, and this is a movie that was made on the cheap, Terrifier 3. It was only budgeted around $2 million, so it took one weekend to basically make more than its money back, right? That's pretty incredible. So there is at least a success story here. Overall, October is not looking great for immediate box office results. There are movies that are getting some good legs, like The Wild Robot for sure, and that was even kind of an immediate success, but not compared to what we saw in July, right? It's not quite on those same levels. But at least we can talk about a movie like Terrifier 3 being in a very unique situation, given how small scale that it was to begin with and how well that it's ultimately doing.
Yeah, it's been incredible. I mean, that first Terrifier, I think, was only made for like $60,000. Terrifier 2, I
think
believe had a budget
200,000 or something like that.
Yeah, like 250,000, and that ended up grossing around 16 million. So it's done well, and to see it now get, of course, a bigger budget for the third film is certainly no surprise. But it's also doing well at the box office. In fact, it, as we just noted, it opens at 14. That almost encapsulates the entire run for Terrifier 2. And in the next couple weeks, one assumes that Terrifier 3 will continue to ring in even more dollars. So it's been a very successful horror franchise. And
have you seen any of the Terrifier films?
I have not seen them. And honestly, I don't know if I will. It just does not seem like my cup of tea.
I've seen parts of Terrifier 2. And I am curious to give all three films a watch sometime. I have to be in the right mindset for it because it was, I'll just say what I saw was pretty brutal. I'll simply say that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I've heard, is that it's extremely brutal. It's a killer clown. That's strike two.
That's strike. That's strike one and strike two all at once, right?
Strike one and strike two.
I mean,
immediately off the bat.
Going to see It Chapter 1 and 2 was hard enough for you as it was.
That was
right?
an exercise. Yeah, that took a lot of mental, emotional, and even physical composure to submit myself to those films. And the nice thing about it is that I ended up enjoying those films quite a bit.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if I would have the same reaction to these films. I'm glad people like them.
You would not. But what I've at least seen from Terrifier 2, it is not tonally at all like It. Chapter 1 and 2 is like Dora the Explorer by comparison.
Yeah. And maybe that's why I like them. I'm glad that people are raving for these films, that it's finding its fan base. It's just not for me. That's okay. It's just not for me. That's all. But I'm glad to see it do well. I'm glad that people that are going are really loving it. And that's great to hear. I'm glad that is the case. And it's always great to see the underdog come out on top the way Terrifier has. I mean, for a franchise to start out at $60,000 as a budget and then make its way up to $2 million as a budget,
That's
and
the
do
dream,
really well.
right?
I mean, that's incredible. That's
Yeah.
that's a great story.
I mean, I think Terrifier 4 has already been announced. I think
Yeah.
that's in production right now. So
And that'll be the final one of the franchise, is what I've read. So
okay, I didn't hear that part, but that maybe
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me.
So
Just
I think
I don't-
they're going to round it out with the 4 films until there's a reboot in another decade.
oh gosh. The idea
Because
that
that's how
Hollywood
this
has to
works, right? That's
reboot
how-
with a big budget, something as low budget
Yeah.
and successful as this is, that's just sad.
Well, that's how Hollywood is.
Hey, it's not about a lack of good and new ideas. It's about old ideas that work.
Yeah.
So let's just be
That's
safe
it.
and risk averse about it.
Yeah, Warner Brothers will buy the rights, and
Oh my
they will
gosh.
make a mockery of the reboot, because
Oh.
that's what they do. So,
Oh gosh. Oh,
we
Kinda-
can all
kinda-
look
kinda
forward
like
to
how-
that.
kind of like how Blumhouse did with The Exorcist Believer earlier, I think.
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
came out. Yeah.
exactly. That's kind of what I'm referencing there. But
Mm.
yeah, happy to see that Terrifier and its fans are having a great time with Terrifier 3.
Yeah.
$14.1 million in its opening weekend.
Yep.
That's great to see. And of course, finished number 1 at the box office. The Wild Robot just behind it. It was neck and neck. $14 million for The Wild Robot in its third weekend. It is currently at $149 million worldwide.
It's doing
The
well.
Wild Robot
doing very
is.
well.
And I love to see that. They, of course, announced a sequel is in the works as well for The Wild Robot.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it is based off of a series of books. So there's
trilogy, if I'm not
source
mistaken.
material, a trilogy of books. So there is source material for them to pull from
Yeah.
as they continue on with what I presume is going to be a trilogy of the Wild Robot movies.
Mhm.
I will say, though, I kind of wish that it was a one-off.
You
Simply
know,
because of
yeah.
what that story is and the way it ends, especially. There's something so heartwarming about it. There's a little ambiguity to it, given the nature of the relationship of those two characters, that final embrace they have, what the future holds for them.
yeah.
I love the idea of that, being left open. And for us to simply enjoy this story, these characters, as special and unique as they are in that film, to leave it at that. I kind of wish that
Yeah.
it was left as a one-off. The same way we think of Wall-E, for example, or Ratatouille. Do we need sequels to those films? I don't think so.
No.
And I'm glad that Pixar has left them alone. And
Sure.
this seems like it could have been another Wall-E in that way. But again, I understand that there's a trilogy of books, so this film has made money, so we're going to
yeah.
greenlight it. I think artistically it was set up to be a great one-off, though.
But and the thing that we talked about a lot in that review was that ambiguity, the nuance of that movie, and how there is perhaps maybe a cynical reading you can take from that film about how this robot of Roz kind of disrupts the balance of nature in the process. Like there is another argument to that movie, and I don't know what the source material has up its sleeve that could either address that or not. If there are going to be more movies here or a trilogy of sorts, I hope it maybe goes in a similar direction as, let's say, the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, which still like even though they all felt like they were all tied to a singular arc, each outing kind of had its own narrative and thematic ethos, right? So each one can still kind of live within its own kind of vacuum in a way. I hope they're going to do something like that, Chris Sanders and company, if they're going to tap into the trilogy of it all. But of course that depends on the source material. I don't know what those stories are. I'd say the biggest thing that worries me is, given the fact that The Wild Robot was the last film to be made under the House of DreamWorks.
That's a great point. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's what made this first movie, The Wild Robot, so artistically interesting, because it almost felt like they had a blank check to work with. They had all hands on deck to just make whatever they wanted because it almost didn't matter anymore. So
Yeah.
what is this going to mean going forward? Is it going to be too much supervision? Will it just end up being the safest of sequels that we can get? That's the thing that worries me, given these new circumstances that would be surrounding it.
Yeah, that's a really great point because this was the final film done in-house, and there's going to be a new studio coming in, a third party that they're going to outsource to. I don't know how that's going to look or how that's going to function, what the logistics of that will be. How much does Chris Sanders have a say in that process?
Yeah. Is it a creative partnership? Is it more of a distribution thing? Like, I don't really know what the, to your point, I don't know what the mechanics are just yet.
Yeah, I don't know. If Chris Sanders is able to still articulate his vision and they're able to still create a similar style and maintain the visual ethos of the first film, that certainly could work. I mean, it's still disappointing that all of those artists are losing their jobs over all of this.
I know.
I still don't like that, but
me too.
As far as moving forward and what this trilogy could be, there are perhaps some concerns there until we see what the output is going to be for this. This new structure, this new
and I don't know
animation studio that's coming in as they they outsource all of this work now. I don't know. I am curious what that is.
Same here.
Is going to be. In some ways, I do wonder if it could be a good thing. And again, I don't know. I'm simply
I don't know.
Talking out loud here. But if we have another studio coming in that, well, I don't know. I feel like historically this hasn't been great now that I'm thinking about it.
I think it
because I was going to say, well, if DreamWorks isn't having to worry about the animation side of it and all they're going to do is focus on the business side of things, then the studio that is doing the animation can make sure that the artists are being paid well, that we're not running into the same issues we've had time and time again when it comes to animation studios and those particular dilemmas. I do wonder if this third party coming in, assuming that they have a good foundation and that they are paying their artists well, them handling that on their own and leaving DreamWorks out of the equation, I could see how that fundamentally could work.
Well, because it separates the creative side from the logistical side.
Exactly. Yeah. The reason as I was thinking about it, kind of pull back is that historically a lot of these animation jobs or the CGI work that we've seen in these live action films, it's all done through that bidding process, right? So they win the bid and whatever the number is, that's what it is. And it doesn't change even if the artists have to work overtime. And historically that has led to a lot of these artists working for free, working late hours, weekends, tons and tons of overtime work without getting paid because it's the bid, no matter what. Like whatever that number is, the studio doesn't go above it. And
and how often does it happen where animation has to be reworked because the story just got reworked?
Exactly. It's happened many, many times, and that's why a lot of these animators, whether it be animated films or CGI work, why there's been a lot of conflict in the past. And I don't know if this will end up being a similar situation or if it's DreamWorks simply saying, we'll pay you. Whatever it is, we'll make sure that you get paid. It's not a bidding process thing. We just want to have someone else come in to do that work so we can focus on other things. I'm hoping it's that, but I'm
hoping it's that. But even so, when if we go outside the realm of animation, when we see popular movies and franchise movies have this kind of partnership with other studios and distributors, that does lead to creative conflict more often than not. And the ones I think about the most are, let's say, the Sony Spider-Man universe, especially the ones with Tom Holland, that partnership
Yeah.
between Sony and Marvel Studios. You can argue that Marvel Studios is really the creative force in many ways, but Sony always has to get their hand in that creative cookie jar. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
No Way Home was a huge hit. Guess what, Marvel? You maybe didn't even have a Spider-Man 4 plan, but guess what? Now you do. So it's like that there always becomes kind of this conflict that tends to arise, especially when movies do well financially. And I don't know if that'll end up happening if there is still this split, as you're talking about, between the artful side and the logistical side. There might still be a few, combating heads here.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know. Maybe much of that will come to light as we move forward and we see what this process is going to be for you or for DreamWorks, and perhaps we'll have an answer to that here soon. But because I don't know, I'm mostly just speculating at what the process could be. I do hope that this move, even though in-house DreamWorks artists are losing their jobs, if it comes at the behest of this third party coming in and they have all of their T's crossed and I's dotted and everyone's paid and everything is transparent.
Yeah.
And it's just DreamWorks wanting to relieve themselves of that part of the business so they can focus on the actual business or maybe even the creative side. Maybe the animators are just animating and that's all they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm hoping that will create a more seamless process. But we'll see. We'll see.
Think of them as like an agency to some other business or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because as a good partnership, and hopefully that does end up being the case there.
Either way, we are getting a sequel. So I'm going to be curious because I do love this film. In the same ways I felt with Inside Out. Inside Out did not need a sequel. It did not. It was a masterpiece, an immaculate film that functions impeccably on its own terms. And I would have loved for that film to exist in that way forever. However, we obviously did get a sequel.
We did.
And I enjoyed it.
It wasn't bad. It doesn't tarnish the legacy of the first one.
No,
so
I don't. No, it doesn't. I think it is a great compliment to the first film, if anything. I think, it answered a lot of my fears in ways that I very much did appreciate. I do think The Wild Robot is the best animated film of the year I've seen thus far. I probably prefer Transformers 1 to Inside Out 2 as well.
I do as well.
But
Orion in the Dark on Netflix, I also prefer over Inside Out 2.
Okay. We might differ on that.
Yeah.
My point in all of that is to say, even if Inside Out 2 is, let's say, my fifth animated film of the year, and when it's all said and done, that could likely be the case if
it's still not a bad
others, movie. Because like Inside Out 2, I much prefer to something like Piece by Piece. We'll get to that later this week.
Oh, me too.
Much better film than
me
that.
too. Yeah. Spoiler alert, very much.
and I'm with you. I do like Orion in the Dark. I think at the very least that is one of the best surprises of the year, perhaps one of the best overlooked movies of the year. I still really like that film a lot too. Inside Out 2 could likely end up as my number 5, but I think it's still a worthy number 5. Like I really like it a lot. And that was a film that I did enter in with a ton of reservations. And maybe being a little skeptical because I just don't think the film needed to exist.
It's not Toy Story 4.
Understandably why they chose to greenlit it because the first film made a gazillion dollars.
Yeah.
So The Wild Robot 2, or whatever it will end up being titled, similarly, I have my reservations. The source material could be great, though. The final product, the final film could end up being spectacular. I don't know. I am simply speaking selfishly that artistically, I think that first film that we just saw and talked about is an immaculate one-off, emotionally and thematically.
The second book is apparently called The Wild Robot Escapes.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, given where we see Roz at the end of that film, I mean, I don't think she's going to stay there.
I feel like most animated films these days, especially if you're Pixar or DreamWorks, sequels tend to stick to the numerical process. So my money would bet that the sequel will just be called The Wild Robot 2.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is likely. I mean, that's what they did with the How to Train Your Dragon movies
Until the
and
third
Kung
one.
Fu Panda, right? So,
Yeah.
and the Shrek
well,
movies.
that's
That's
what-
consistent
well,
for the brand.
Kind of. I mean, like Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After was more of a play on the sequel terms that would come with it. Really, the only outlier is How to Train Your Dragon 3 was called How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, and went with the
Yeah, that's true. They
Yeah.
did forgo the third part there.
which I don't really like that. I
It is a
would have
bit
liked
odd.
consistency.
After
You know,
How to Train Your Dragon 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't understand the motivation there. Either way, whatever it's titled, I'll be open to it. I'm just speaking selfishly. I think it was great as a one-off.
as long as it doesn't go the Toy Story 4 route.
Yeah, that's where it, but I think maybe the big difference is that at least with the Wild Robot, we just have the one film. There is certainly more to mine with this film. As much as I do love the ambiguity and the open-endedness of it, I much prefer that. However,
Same.
there is still a lot to this world that could still be explored. There's a lot of questions that the film could tackle, wrestle with further, such as even the cynical aspect of it that you brought up in the review as far as the island. How do the animals interact with each other? The questions we raised in that conversation, maybe the sequel will answer.
A bear and a fox hanging out. Yeah, you're my buddy, but now I'm going to try and eat you.
Like maybe that'll be part of the second film, them trying to wrestle with that new dynamic and what that's going to look like. I don't know, but I do think there's more to be explored. Toy Story 4, by the time we got to that point, we had explored everything we could have with those three movies. Unless you are going to completely take us in a very new direction with Toy Story 4, meaning no Andy, it's someone else, and it's new toys. It's not Woody and his crew, like just completely new characters altogether.
I like Forky.
Like exactly like Forky, like more Forkies and less the usual crew.
More Forky and less inner voice Buzz, as I dub him in that. Still, the worst thing that Pixar has ever done. Actually, the two worst things that Pixar has ever done somehow involve Buzz Lightyear. And that's inner voice Buzz from Toy Story 4, and then it's the film Lightyear.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. Abysmal.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is to say, like, that to me is the biggest difference. Like, Toy Story 4 was just a regurgitation of the first three movies. And I found that mostly mundane, quirky at times, fun in places, mostly a regurgitation. The Wild Robot 2 will have more sand in its sandbox to kind of play with. So,
for sure. It's only one outing thus far.
Yeah. But spiritually, I understand your sentiment there and kind of agree in terms of the spiritual sentiment for sure.
Sure.
Anything else as far as the box office goes? I think we've pretty much covered it there.
I think we have. I'm very curious to see what happens next weekend now, because these are interesting results that we're seeing. I wonder how Terrifier 3 is going to do in its second weekend, just given that success. And the fact that it is still spooky season, it's ramping up even more with every weekend. I could see that having some legs. And I can even see Beetlejuice having some legs still. Which doesn't surprise me, even despite the fact that I guess you can now rent it for $20 on VOD. So it exists in both platforms now, and yet still is doing very well box office wise.
Yeah, I do think Terrifier 3 will have some major competition in the next couple of weeks, which is why it needed to land the way it did.
It's already a success, so it doesn't really need to have legs at this
point. It's already been successful. I do think there'll be somewhat of a drop off. Maybe not 81%, but there'll be something of a drop off. Yeah. Because this coming weekend we have Smile 2. I think that one is going to do really well.
That actually looks really good.
It does look interesting.
I'm very surprised by how much I'm intrigued by that one.
Yeah. I honestly haven't seen the first film. That might be something I try to catch up with this week. For whatever reason, I just missed it the first time around. Never got around.
I caught it late. It's a pretty effective horror film. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
And that first film did $217 worldwide. I'm not sure its budget, but $217 worldwide.
I'm sure it made its money. I'm sure it made its money back.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that rings of very good.
17 million was its budget.
Okay, so yes, that totally makes a lot of sense. I would have guessed somewhere in that range.
Yeah, that seems about right.
And then Smile 2, let's see if I can find it real fast.
It's an over 2-hour film, so we know the budget's going to be bigger.
I'd have to do more research.
I'm not finding the official, but they may not have publicized
They might not have released that yet.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine that the budget is a whole lot more than that. Maybe we can guess somewhere in the 30 to 40.
I was going to guess 30 to
range.
50. Yeah.
30 to 50, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. So given that the first film did 217, it has its own fans. I do think Smile 2 is going to do really well this weekend.
Yeah.
And then the following week you have Venom. Again, say what you will about those movies, but people go watch them at the box office. And between Smile 2 and Venom, I think Terrifier 3 will certainly start to see diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, at this point, it doesn't need it, though. So good job,
Terrifier.
Good job,
again, its fans went to see it, and they really liked it.
Yeah.
So
I think it's holding like a 61 on Metacritic, so it's still in the green there, which is pretty good. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. The last thing I'll note on the box office, and then we'll move on.
Okay.
I don't think it's gone extremely wide. I'd have to do a little bit more research to confirm that. But Saturday Night did not perform extremely well in its opening weekend.
I think it went to number 7 or something like
Number
that.
7. I think it's only sitting at like 4.1. So again, Transformers 1. And it's third weekend, did I say? Third weekend?
Yeah.
Almost grossed as much as Saturday Night. So, not great.
Youch.
Not great, but I don't know how many theaters it's gone to quite yet. I think that's a film that's going to expand more and more as it goes. It's probably going to be a little bit of a slow trickle.
It's slow. I don't know if we're. I think it's technically wide now, just given how many theaters it's in. But I don't think it's officially everywhere, to your point, just yet.
Yeah, I don't think it's everywhere. But the reason I'm maybe a little bit surprised on that is, one, given the popularity of Saturday Night, and it's kind of like a really fun movie. Like, I could see general audiences really eating it up. It's got a huge cast, and there's a lot of energy to the film. It just feels like a movie that should do well. Like if Saturday Night came out, let's say 25 years ago, it would have made $100 million. Not in its opening weekend, but in its run.
I do wonder if, it's a stacked cast for sure, right? But is it a stacked cast because of people that we know in our circle, but not as much general audiences? Like, I do wonder about that. In a way, it almost seems to mirror how when Saturday Night first started as Saturday Night, they were mostly, people like Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. They were mostly up-and-comers at that time. They weren't as well-known at that time. So I guess coincidentally, they're being portrayed by people who are kind of in a similar up-and-coming kind of spectrum. Are they enough to sell the movie? And maybe that's part of the reason. Because I agree with you. The vibe of the movie seems like something that people would go for and have a good time at the movies with. But what is the thing that's maybe holding it back from doing as well as it seems like it should be? And maybe the cast is part of it.
That certainly could be the case. It's directed by Jason Reitman. I don't know how much of a household name he is, but he's been around for a while. He's made films that have been very successful before. And while the cast is young, to your point, and maybe many of them are not household names.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that point. I don't think many of them are yet, even though I do think they are great
I think
actors,
they're
but
on the they're in that trajectory. I think they'll get there soon, probably.
I think part of it is the marketing. I haven't seen much marketing for this. I don't know how much marketing Sony is planning on doing for Saturday night. It has been a little bizarre in that way. And maybe I've missed it. Simply, I might be missing
I've
it.
only really seen
but I
those
haven't
two
seen
trailers.
much.
I think the trailers are pretty. I think the trailers are pretty good, but I feel like they're pretty limited as far as when and how they're being placed. And I think that you're right. That could be it. It's just they have a good marketing visual for it. They're just not utilizing it as best as they could.
I assumed they did some sort of promotion during Saturday Night Live the last couple of weeks. I don't know. Admittedly, I did not get a chance to see SNL the last couple of weeks, so I don't really know. In fact, I'll talk about this a little bit more when we do our review of Saturday Night coming out this week.
Yeah.
I saw Saturday Night on Saturday night during Saturday night. So like I had a triple header meta concoction going on.
Wow, you just got Saturday Night Inception going on there. That's
not
so confusing at all.
I missed SNL this last week.
So then what Saturday night is referenced to that Saturday night? So what Saturday night is what Saturday night?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know which Saturday night is which Saturday night in that analogy now.
Yeah. But that is to say, I don't know how much marketing there's been for this. I think that's part of it as well. Yeah. And that just, it kind of, I would love to be a fly on the wall in the Sony offices because there's a great energy to the film. As I noted, the cast is phenomenal. There is a lot of fun to be had with the film. It just feels like a film that a mainstream audience would eat up. So why? And I went to see this at my local AMC, and it wasn't playing in one of the bigger houses. It was in one of the smaller theaters.
Gotcha.
But it was mostly full, and people really enjoyed it. But I don't know. Like I my crowd seemed to be into it, but
okay.
I don't know. It's a little strange to me. It's a little odd. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well, maybe it has legs.
Yeah, perhaps if Sony decides to push this at all, and I don't know, because
I don't know if they will.
I feel like I've seen more conversation in terms of the film in relation to its awards campaign, and its awards potential, and I could absolutely see the Academy going for this film. It feels like an Academy kind of film with its ensemble and its energy and its fun. But the cast, or not the cast, the like, I don't know, like its whole box office run, because like Brendan, for some transparency here, he got it a week earlier than its technical wide release.
I did.
So he gets it like late September, which is again kind of strange. I did not. I live in the Miami area. We did not get this film early. It comes out October 5th. Again, maybe with a little marketing. It's wide release. Who knows how many theaters? It's like the whole thing has just been kind of mysterious. Is what I'm trying.
It has been.
It's just been weird.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I got it in the city. When you get a movie in limited release, it tends to go into an urban or metropolitan area like a New York or a Philadelphia or something like that. No, I got it here in King of Prussia. So
I don't know. Like I don't understand what Sony's doing with this movie. Anyway, that's all I wanted to bring up to say.
Yeah.
Before we get to the back half of the show, we are going to be talking about our top 10 horror films. This is obviously inspired by One Spooky Season. Boo, everyone. Hello. Also, Variety recently had an article that came out with their top 100 horror films of all time. And holy Lord, that, and you won't believe this, sparked some polarizing discourse.
Well, I will say this. I'm glad that it did, because maybe people will stop talking about Joker.
Well, and it very much did. I do think, again, to the whole Joker thing, that film came and went like a fart in the wind, just no one seemed to really care. People,
Right.
again, they threw out their thoughts on the film and then quickly moved on. And the Variety article was certainly a catalyst in that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically around, spoiler alert for those that have not read the Variety article, but at number one, they had the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep.
And the conversation that ended up unfolding kind of blew my mind. And a way that
People were armed with chainsaws to,
like,
to express their thoughts.
I just don't understand how we get to this every single time. Every single time we find ourselves at this position. But the article comes out, and there's a contingent of people that are like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and number one? And they were very much surprised. Some genuinely surprised. Many with, of course, their clickbaity attention.
Yeah.
Wants to completely degrade Texas Chainsaw Massacre at number one and finding it maybe a little pretentious on Variety's end. So, as you would expect with that kind of reaction, a lot of others, critics, cinephiles, they respond with, kind of amping up the idea, kind of backing Variety that it is worthy of that number one spot and that it's one of the best American movies ever made. And so then you have this teetering back and forth between these two aisles of the spectrum where people could not believe that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is number one, and others that find these people to be obtuse. And I'm just sitting here, like, I was reading so much of it, and every single tweet, regardless of which side it came from, I felt like I was about to die of a brain aneurysm. Like, because like the whole thing was so dumb and futile. Like, we're talking about the best horror films of all time. The best horror films of all time. There are so many great movies to talk about with this specific list.
Yeah.
One, why do we have to get caught up in this specific debate? And if we do, can we not have an actual conversation about it? But I didn't see any of that.
I didn't see that either.
All I saw was people on this side of the aisle dunking on the other side, and then the people on this side of the aisle dunking on the other side over here. It was absolutely asinine. And here's the thing, like, we'll talk about our top 10 movies or top 10 horror movies here in a minute.
Yeah.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, worthy of being a number one in that list. Totally worthy. I understand Variety. I understand a lot of the critics.
Yep.
It's a great movie.
And sorry to cut you off, because this is where I think maybe people listening to us that hope we would get into the discourse a little bit more that you're talking about might be sadly disappointed and bored by what we have to say about this.
Well, and that's the thing, but
it's like in this case, we have two sides of this spectrum here. It is entirely possible that both sides can be right. I think in the case of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is it in my top 10? No, it is not in my top 10. Do I think it's a worthy number one for the cases of this article? Kind of. Actually, I get it. I absolutely get it. You watch that movie now, you could see the seeds of almost every horror movie that came afterwards. As far as influence, it's hard to ignore what Tobe Hooper was doing with that movie.
For sure.
It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is totally worthy of being in that spot. It is incredibly influential. The horror is visceral. It is thematically rich and dense. There is a lot to love about the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, the low budget is its biggest asset. Like that, it is such an ugly and like the creepiness of that movie is like the sense of place, the setting of it all. Like it just feels so dirty and dangerous. Like it makes you feel unclean.
Which is incredible when you consider the social, political themes of the film, the whole economic aspect of what that film is commenting on.
Yeah.
There's a lot, like the low budget aspect of the film, how that comes off visually. It really is a thematic weight to that film.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I completely agree. So I think it is a great number one. However, Alien exists. That film is a masterpiece. The Exorcist, which is heralded as one of, if not the best horror film of all time, that is also worthy. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, people might have that as number one. Spielberg's Jaws, perhaps. There are many, many films that we can talk about that make a great argument, an excellent case to also be number one.
Yeah.
It turns out like we can have a genuine conversation about all of these films and the cases they make to be the best horror film of all time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And that's my hot take, I guess. Like my hot take in all of this is, hey, can we just be cordial and have a conversation? Like, why is that the outlier sentiment in the whole
boring,
discourse around
apparently.
all
I
this?
guess it's boring.
I
don't know.
just
Sean Fennessy was right.
I just like it blew my mind. Like, just God forbid we have a genuine conversation around this movie. It is either that is the worst number one that one could possibly have. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Are you kidding me? That film is bad or whatever they were trying to say. And then the other side is like, there's no other choice here. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre or let's all go home. And it's like, what? Why? Why? Like, I just, like both sides of the aisle. I don't understand. I truly don't get it.
Well, Variety's probably making their money back with clicks after that article. I'll tell you that.
It was at least being talked about.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they appreciated being, like provoking that conversation.
Oh, for sure.
That
yeah.
clicks or not. I'm sure
it's
very much led
getting
to clicks.
people talking about Variety in general. So it's going to give them some, some longevity, I guess, for the rest of the year as far as their own other publications are concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, even though it's 2024, we are extremely polarized, especially this year with all of the election and political controversies that make up our discourse on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
Yet, I still saw that unfold and could not believe that was the conversation that was happening.
You're so right that there's so much.
Still.
You're so right that there's so much discourse out there now. I don't need Joker and Leatherface to make it worse for me.
I just don't get it.
Both sides can be right, people. It's a good movie.
Yeah. I mean, I do think people that were irked at it being number one, I think part of it is one. I would venture a guess. I could be completely wrong. This might be myopic of me, but I'm willing to bet that many of them haven't even seen the film. And if they have seen it, it's probably been decades. And there's certainly some sort of bias with whatever their film is, whether it's Jaws, The Exorcist, maybe something more modern.
No, they probably wanted Hereditary at number one.
Hereditary. Yeah, certainly was thinking about that as well. I could see those people coming at Texas Chainsaw Massacre because of their own ignorance.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's what sparked outrage on the other side of why are you disowning Texas Chainsaw Massacre when you probably haven't seen it? It is a great film, one of the great American horror movies, and is worthy of being that spot. And they were not willing to budge on that sentiment because the other side was also so robust in their opinions as well. And I think that's the problem. And even though you were kind of joking about it, that is the Sean Fennessy theory.
It is.
It's
yeah.
like like I can't have a cordial conversation with you on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have to be just as extreme in my firm opinion because you're being you're not being open-minded about this.
Yeah. And everyone's just trying to get the last word in is really what it turns out to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's pulling apart and there's no room in the middle for open-mindedness, I guess.
It's so
Which is
interesting too,
to me.
because in a weird way, this speaks to the variety, no pun intended, the variety of horror films in general. Like no horror film is the same, and you look at this list from Variety, it really is a variety, right? You can if none of these were even lumped under the horror genre, so many of these feel like they would otherwise be different genre films. Some of them you might even be able to argue aren't really horror films by the most literal definition. A movie like Jaws being as ranked highly as it is, I don't really consider that horror, but I understand why it's on the list. But there is kind of a broadness to how you define that, and that's kind of what makes this list one of the more interesting film ranking lists that we've seen as of late. And I don't mean that in the sense that I agree with it or even disagree with it, but I think it really demonstrates how interesting the horror genre is, and how versatile and interesting that it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can have intellectual, emotional horror, something more outright, depending on what the film is and its goals. Because, they have Manhunter on this list as well. I don't when I watched that for our Michael Mann series,
I never saw it as a horror film either, but I mean, it has some horrific elements.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not I bring that up to say that, it's a great example of that broadness that you're talking about because there's horrific elements of it, but I think at its core, it's not really a horror film, certainly not in the conventional sense. I mean, but I could understand why they wanted to have that a part of the conversation here.
This is a list that also had Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2 back to back with Fritz Lang's M. And it just goes to show how versatile that this can be.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's what I wish the conversation was on, is how eclectic this is. What is the definition of horror? How do you define horror?
Yeah.
How does that affect your list when it comes to your own personal rankings? I think there's so much more of a fascinating conversation to be had if we could, again, go back to the art of having a conversation and how lost that is here, especially on social media.
Yeah.
But it is truly mind-boggling to me how that is all but dissipated.
Yeah.
Because there is so much to talk about with this list that I genuinely find interesting. Even just discussing the top 10, if you wanted to have a conversation just on that alone, I mean, there's 100 films here that you could talk about. What films would you add to the list? And yet, instead of that, it is, let's have a bitch fight over one movie. Okay.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre now, and hopefully they watch the right one and the one that doesn't have Jessica Biel in it.
Well, and here's the thing: if according to the Discourse, people would either watch that film with utter glee and with their bias of this is the best horror film of all time and nothing else is even in the conversation, or people are hate watching it in bad faith with nothing but contempt. I don't know if that helps the conversation at all, but that's what the Discourse seems to suggest. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right, Brendan, we need to talk about a movie that is ironically a little applicable to my life anyway.
I was going to say, are people going to want to watch this movie right now?
Maybe not in South Florida. Last week, we did have, I believe, 4 or 5 different twisters in the air, tornadoes in the area, rather.
Yeah,
I don't know if there were any storm chasers around, but we did.
Did they feel it? Did they chase it?
we felt it. We chased it. We owned it.
Maybe you would have met Tyler Owens. That would have been awesome.
maybe he was around kicking.
Maybe he
Yeah,
was
who
around,
knows?
yeah,
His whole
kicking, yeah.
team, that truck. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that truck would have been all that useful in the swamp, which is where I know one of them landed. One of the tornadoes in the area landed
Right.
over in the swamp over there. But at any rate, yeah, Twisters. We're here to talk about Twisters because
Yeah.
it is out right now. It's available on digital and on Blu-ray,
Yep.
4K. Go check it out.
Absolutely.
We saw it earlier in the air. We talked about it here on the show.
Mhm.
I liked it overall. I think there's a lot of good things in it. I think there's fun. Glenn Powell is very
yeah.
Glenn Powell.
Yep. It's a movie that did pretty well domestically, not as well overseas, but it does feel to be a very American movie, especially given its sense of
Yeah.
place, the American, like Midwest, if you want to call it that, middle America. So if there's a way to maybe boost the longevity of this movie and give it some legs, whether it be in the digital realm or outside of that, this is your chance that we're about to offer.
Absolutely. Maybe you missed it during the summer if you're really busy. I don't think I caught it in theaters the week it came out because I was on vacation. I believe I caught up with it after I got back.
Right.
However, either way, if you like Twisters, if you like tornadoes, you got to give this one a go. We have 5 digital codes to give away. So if you want to win one of these digital codes, if you want to catch up with this film, if you want to rewatch it, if you want to own it, simply follow us on social media. Hit us up at InSession Film on Instagram and on Twitter. Stay tuned as we will have some information available on how you can win one of these digital codes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's Lee Isaac Chung. It's him doing the whole Twisters thing. I liked that original Twister. I was looking forward to this film. Again, you got
You
Glenn
can't
Powell.
go wrong with Glenn Powell.
Yeah, I mean, he's just the best. It's also got Anthony Ramos. It's got Daisy Edgar Jones, Brandon Pereira, among a few others as well.
Absolutely.
So go check out Twisters. You're going to want to watch this film. Again, it's available on VOD and Blu-ray right now. But if you want to win a digital code, hit us up on social media. Stay tuned as we'll have information as to how we're going to give those away. And we thank Twisters for their support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about coffee. Cheers.
Is that what you're doing right now? Is that what you're drinking right now this late at night?
Of course. I drink
Oh, I
coffee
love
all
it.
the time. It's
This is
the
why you
only
run
way for
these
me to
shows.
survive.
This is why you run these shows. But at the same time, I don't blame you because I'm always in the mood from a taste standpoint. I'm always in the mood for a good coffee, even late at night. And honestly, coffee cold has been spoiling me. It's been spoiling me just given how
the
great
best.
it is. Yeah.
No, I do love it. I mean, generally you shouldn't drink coffee late at night. However, when you have 2 kids and you're working all day and you're preparing to do a show as we do here every single week, sometimes you need that late night boost.
Yep.
And this late night boost is what gets me through these episodes a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, especially when my young one is up at 3:00 in the morning crying his head off.
Of course.
So we love Coffee Call because they give us that caffeinated boost. But it's not just about the caffeine, right? It's not just about the boost. What's great about Coffee Call is that they source specialty grade coffee from all over the world, where they get premium coffee.
Yep.
And if you don't know what that means, specialty grade is the highest grade of coffee you can get. Oftentimes, though, when you get a bag of specialty grade coffee, it comes with, defects in it. Some of the beans have kind of rotted away, or they have insect bites on them, whatever the case may be. And that's you either roast the whole thing, or you can do what Coffee Cult does. They go a step further and they pick out all of those defects. So they only roast the high-end gourmet bean in every single bag of coffee. So it is literally the best coffee on the planet. And they have specific roast profiles.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not even just that, it's also how ethically sourced that it is. Yeah, because for those of you listening, you would think that process would just overcomplicate how coffee is sourced and mined, but it's actually all ethically sourced, making sure that they're coming from farms that actually pay their workers, especially women. So it's really looking out for that type of greater good outside of just the great tasting product that it is.
Yeah, exactly. It's ethically sourced. That is a big part of it. In fact, they have a video coming out soon where the owner of Coffee Cult talks about how he did not buy a Guatemalan coffee a few years ago because of that problem. The women were not being paid fairly. It was a great coffee, one of the best coffees in the area, but he chose not to buy it until they fixed that problem. A few years later, they did fix that problem, and that's when he got the coffee.
Good.
So that is absolutely a big part of the business. Ethically sourced, great gourmet coffee. Go support them. Go check them out. That's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K as well. Coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF24, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that code is ISF24, coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. Okay, well, with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into something a little bit more positive. We're going to talk about our favorite horror films using that Variety article as inspiration. We're going to talk about our own top 10 horror films, and we'll have a conversation. Now, we're going to do this differently than, let's say, we do our retrospective top 10s or our yearly InSession Film Awards, where we go pick by pick and we kind of discuss them. And those episodes obviously end up going a little longer as a result. Yeah. But we're not going to be here for 6 hours. Don't worry. We're going to do this a little bit differently. We're just going to go ahead and reveal our top 10 here. And we're just going to kind of talk about them as we go and why we ended up making the selections here. So, Brendan, go ahead, lay it on me. What is your top 10 horror movies?
I will say my top 10 is still subject to change. There's a lot of horror films I want to revisit that I know I maybe saw at the wrong time in my life, but I still have this weird interest or this weird curiosity. Like they're still like lingering in my brain. Like for instance, a movie that was ranked very highly on Variety's article is Don't Look Now. The Nicholas Roeg film with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland, which is a film when I first saw some years ago, I did not care for. And I still don't really like it that much, but there are things about it that always stuck with me, and maybe I'm in the right headspace to give that one another go. And there are many films on this list that sort of fit that category for me. So this is very much how I feel now. And as I go through my 10, I'm going to maybe reference where Variety had it to showcase that there is some disparity here. You and I are definitely going to have some crossover for sure. I know that, which is probably what makes it worthwhile to just go through this list and not, go, option by option and make this a 5-hour show. Number 10 right now, I have The Witch, the Robert Eggers film, which Variety had at number 49. At number 9 for me is Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which they had at number 74, which honestly kind of surprised me. I thought they'd have that one a little bit higher, just given the fanaticism of that franchise and how big that it became. My number 8 is Roman Polanski's Repulsion, which was at their number 100. It barely cracked their top 100. And I love that film. I actually slightly prefer over Rosemary's Baby. My number 7 was in Variety's top 10, and that was Carrie, the Stephen King adaptation from Brian De Palma. I think that's probably it's Carrie and Stand By Me, I think, are the two best Stephen King cinematic adaptations ever made. And in the purposes of horror, Carrie certainly cracks this list for me. Number 6 is a film that wasn't even in the top 100. So when we did our 2001 retrospective not too long ago, JD, do you remember I brought up a film called Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa? Yeah, that was that was nowhere on this list, and I was genuinely surprised by that. The film stars the great Koji Akusho, who we loved in Perfect Days just last year. This is a great movie. If you haven't seen it yet, I really urge you to check it out. I think you'll find it really fascinating, and I found it very unnerving as a serial killer horror film. So that's where my number 6 is right now. At my number 5, Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone, which was their number 8. My numbers 4 through number 1 is probably where we'll have quite a bit of crossover. My number 4 is The Thing, the John Carpenter film. They had that at number 46. My number 3 is The Fly, the David Cronenberg film. They had that at 56. Number 2 for me is The Exorcist, William Friedkin's film. They also had that at number 2, so I'm lockstepping them with on that one. My favorite is Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, which they almost had in their top 10. I think they had it at number 11, if I'm not mistaken, but that is still my favorite horror film of all time and probably one of my favorite franchises of all time still, just given how weird that franchise is. We talked about that a lot during our Alien Romulus review and how much we just respect how each film has its own vision. And I still think that first Alien is among the most perfect movies ever made. And that's where my number 1 is.
Okay. So just for clarity, can you just list them in order again so we have them
Absolutely.
at the top of our heads here?
Number 10, The Witch. Number 9, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Number 8, Repulsion. Number 7, Carrie. Number 6, Cure. Number 5, The Devil's Backbone. Number 4, The Thing. Number 3, The Fly. Number 2, The Exorcist. And number 1, Alien.
Okay. So those are Brennan's 10. And I will say, as far as my list here, I feel like there are certainly a few that are interchangeable. So this is where I'm at now. Could this change, let's say, in the next hour? Maybe. Certainly
same
tomorrow
here.
And in the next week.
We may talk about some of these films as we go, and not even just the 10 that you have or the 10 I have. We may talk about other films we love from this list, other horror films that we love that maybe weren't even represented on Variety's list. So this could change in a matter of minutes, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, so with all of that said, at number 10 for me, and this is perhaps a little bit of, I could see this one being a little contentious in terms of, again, that idea of, is this really a horror film? Mm-hmm. But I go back to the idea that fundamentally there is an emotional, psychological horror brewing, even though on the surface, it might not feel like a conventional horror, but I do think it is one of the best films ever made, and there are certainly horror components. Maybe similar to something like Jaws, which I didn't really include here, or even something like Manhunter.
Yeah.
You could even argue Silence of the Lambs. Those films and their horror components aren't it doesn't necessarily make them a horror film on its whole. I do feel a little bit differently. I would make a slight argument, even though it's kind of in a similar camp. Anyway, that's a lot of preamble to say that at number 10, I have The Night of the Hunter.
Okay.
The 1955 film, I believe that one is. And again, I just go back to, the thematic underbelly of that film and its dichotomies, I think, boil this horror discussion that I think is extremely, extremely vivid in that film.
Aesthetically, it does carry a lot of the same traits we associate horror films to have. Like, there are images and sequences from The Night of the Hunter that rival any traditional horror film that was coming out at that same time. I think that one certainly qualifies. There are so many horrific things in it that it almost feels disingenuous not to call it a horror film.
Okay. I did have a backup just in case. So
I'm not going to push back on that one. That's too good of a movie.
I know you necessarily wouldn't, but for anyone out there listening, if it wasn't that, I think I would probably put in Night of the Living Dead as maybe that number 10.
The other film with the word night in it.
Yeah, the other night film. Exactly. It was one of the night films.
One of the night films, which means your next film going to be an M. Night Shyamalan film or something like that.
Yeah. I could also go with Guillermo del Toro, whether that be Pan's Labyrinth, Devil's Backbone. I could certainly go back on either one of those films. I could include a del Toro there at that number 10 as well.
Okay.
I have a few selections for sure.
Yeah.
At number 10, at number 9, I have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I hope that's okay. I hope that's okay with everybody.
It's not okay.
It's not number 1, but it's number 9. I hope that's all right. So
not okay. Not okay. You're feeding the horse right now. Yeah.
Yeah. At number 8 for me is Nosferatu.
Okay.
And I'm going with Robert Eggers' Nosferatu.
You're just assuming it's going to be that
just
good.
assuming it's great.
Well,
So,
that is the big asterisk with my list, is that The Witch might get knocked out by another Robert Eggers film.
but yeah, Robert Eggers just might outdo himself. Yeah, and honestly, like I don't have The Witch on my list. Now that you bring that up once again, I could also have that at number 10. That's one of those that I would have no problem sliding that in there at number 10.
Our honorable mentions are going to be so long.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so I have Nosferatu, the 1922 film, there at number 8.
Okay.
The only modern horror film I have on my list here at number 7 is Jordan Peele's Get Out.
I figured that was going to be on your list. I thought that would be higher for some reason, though.
Yeah, I mean, again, some of these, it could be interchangeable with some of the ones above it for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I think Get Out is absolutely brilliant, and I understand the case for Nope. I would understand the case for Us as well. I think as far as a start of a career goes, I don't know how you could do any better than those three. I mean, that is a hell of a way to start your directorial career.
Yeah. And that is certainly more of a horror film, purely horror, when compared to something like Nope, which I do prefer Nope over Get Out, but I think for the context of this list, I think Get Out qualifies more heavily. Nope is another one of those films that I sometimes have a hard time calling quote unquote horror, even though it does have horror. It's almost just as much a horror film as it is a Western in many ways. Like it's a concoction of Hollywood in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think similar to Night of the Hunter, maybe those two films are kind of comparable here because
maybe
it doesn't have the same horror conventionality as something like Us or Get Out. But in terms of its underbelly, and even with some of its imagery, like it has some of the most horrific images I've seen out of the last 20, 30 years.
Sure.
Speaking of Nope.
Yeah.
What I love about Get Out, and I've talked about it to death, so I don't need to get into it too much, but I do think the way it weaves its horror and comedy is brilliant, especially like the comedy. And I just don't feel like it gets enough credit. Like the way people talk about Jordan Peele as a director for Nope is how I feel about him as a writer for Get Out, because the comedy of that film has a robust thematic underbelly to it. It's a film that Jordan Peele gets to have its cake and eat it too, with the way he uses comedy as a way to complement the horror of that film.
Right.
It's incredible. So yeah, anyway, I have Get Out there at number 7.
Okay.
At number 6 for me is Rosemary's Baby.
Okay.
Really love that one a lot. And number 5 for me is Carrie. I'm with you on that film. Brilliant.
So good. It's so good.
Yep. At number 4, I have Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting about that, Brendan, I don't know if a few years ago I would have had that film in my top 10. But we did, and it's great. I've always really liked it a lot. But we watched it and reviewed it here on the show. And there was something about that exercise where I walked away from that experience having almost like a revelatory perspective, like a new perspective on it.
Yeah.
Okay. That I didn't really have before. I always really liked it, but I never really took the time to really dissect it and analyze it until
it's
we did
a complex movie.
And,
it really is a complex movie.
I think there's some great complexities there that I do love. And obviously that film has been talked to death, so perhaps I could have leaned into that research a little bit more, but there was something about doing that here on the show that I really loved. So I have that at number 4.
Okay.
And these other 3, I don't need to get into a whole lot because you talked about them already. At number 3, I have The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing.
All right.
At number 2, I have The Exorcist, and at 1, it's Alien, masterpiece.
All right.
So those are my 10.
Say number 1. I love that.
Yeah. Crossover. Shocking. So just to clarify, at 10, I have The Night of the Hunter / Del Toro / The Witch. At number 9, I have The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At number 8, Nosferatu. At 7, Get Out. At number 6, Rosemary's Baby. Number 5, Carrie. 4, Psycho. 3, The Thing. 2, The Exorcist. 1, Alien. Those are my top 10 horror films as of right now. That could change in the next day or so.
In the next couple minutes, because we have other films we might want to reference here. Because I'm trying to look at what even some of my honorable mentions for a list like this would be, and there are so many great films we didn't even highlight yet. That Variety also had very highly on their list. I know you and I are both big fans of the original Frankenstein, the James Whale film, which they had in their top 10. That's
love that. Yeah, that's certainly in that 11 through 15 for me.
Absolutely. For sure. Yeah. Psycho is in that for me as well. Wes Craven's Scream is up there for me too. Just for a different type of film. John Carpenter's Halloween is up there too. And you mentioned Rosemary's Baby, probably somewhere in my top 20. I do slightly prefer Repulsion. I think because I just saw it first. So maybe that's where I give the edge to something like Repulsion. I'm actually surprised none of us had The Shining in our top 10s.
Yeah, that's, certainly in the conversation for sure. I don't know where it would rank for me as I get to either my 11 through 20 or even in that 21 through 30s range. I don't know, but it's certainly in the conversation. I do love it.
For the longest time, The Shining was probably my favorite horror film for quite a while. But I think as the years have gone on, I don't want to say that I've become less receptive to the film. I think that's a film I've just seen too many times at this point. It's like when a popular song gets so overplayed that it just starts to lose its value for a good while.
Sure.
And I'm kind of at that point, maybe temporarily, with The Shining. Like it's so engraved in my memory that watching it again doesn't affect me nearly as much as maybe watching Alien again, because I find new things from a sci-fi angle with Alien every single time with regard to its visual depictions of femininity and just really as kind of a rape movie in many ways. Like there's subtext to that movie that I just find more emotionally provocative. That makes that one have more staying power than, let's say, something like The Shining nowadays. But it's still a great movie. It's still a great movie that deserves to be on this list in some way.
No, yeah, I completely agree. A film that I would also have pretty high, and I know I listed a few honorable mentions somewhat jokingly as far as Del Toro, The Witch. Another one for me would be that first Halloween movie. I think it is masterful.
Yeah.
It's really great. I mean, say what you will about the sequels and this latest reboot, sigh. But that original Halloween, I think, is a masterful slasher film. I know that's a hot take, but as far as films that are aesthetically and thematically in sync, I mean, that is up there as far as one of the best. So that might be like 12 for me, like 12 or 13.
Okay.
I think I'm that high on it.
Okay. Yeah, it might be like 15 or 16, around that range for me. Like if I were to do an 11 through 20 right now, if I were to just do it really quickly, this is kind of unranked. It's really just a bunch of films that I know would probably be in there. But Psycho, The Shining, Scream, Halloween, Rosemary's Baby, Evil Dead 2 might be up there for me. That movie's just a lot of fun. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was when I saw it at a very young age, so I'm still very much affected by it. As far as a few others, and I did want to ask this question to you, were there any horror films that you thought of that you love that maybe if you were to do your own personal, let's say, top 50, they would make your own top 50, but they weren't anywhere in Variety's top 100? Like, were there any films like that came to mind? And I bring that up because one that I probably would have in my top 20 is J.A. Bayona's The Orphanage.
The Orphanage? Yeah, love that film.
Yeah.
That could certainly be in the conversation as far as my personal list. I'm trying to think, especially in terms of like recent horror, because I do think there wasn't a lot in terms of recent horror that I was considering when putting this list together, because again, we were focusing on a top 10 and not a top 50.
Yeah, and we still need some time for those movies to break in. I gave the edge to the to The Witch because I think it's earned that status right now. But I still thought about movies like The Orphanage, like I just mentioned there. Jeremy Saulnier's Green Room was one I also gave a little bit of thought to. from 2020. Remember that movie, The Night House, with Rebecca
You
Hall, that I
sure?
like.
Yeah,
I
I know
liked
you love
quite a
that
bit
one a
more than
lot.
most people.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite great.
Yeah.
So there were a few I thought of for sure.
Yeah, that is a great point. I'm trying to think here off the cuff. I mean, kind of a tricky one, the one that comes to mind because of recency bias. But one film that we talked about last year that might fit in this, Night of the Hunter realm is The Zone of Interest, where
Okay.
again, aesthetically doesn't really invoke horror. When you
Right.
think about what is happening in that film, the backdrop of it is extremely horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain images that on their own terms are extremely horrific, right? You think about the
Yeah.
ashes in the water,
Yeah.
or even that shot of the hallway and the darkness that we see unfold there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and obviously the actions of its characters are repulsive. So
Yeah. Very horrific.
that one,
for
I
sure.
think, in a Night of the Hunter kind of way, might fit. And if that does
Mhm.
qualify, I would absolutely consider that as well.
Okay.
What else has come out?
Um.
I mean, there.
Oh.
I,
How about Let Me In? The Matt Reeves version of Let the Right One In. I think
Let
is.
Me In.
I don't think it's as
yes.
good as Let the Right One In, but I think it's almost just as good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love both of those films. I think
I do
those
too.
could-
I do too. I think they're it's kind of a hair apart between the two.
Yeah. I mean, the one that really came to mind for me, aside from Get Out, is The Witch. Like those 2
Mhm.
are easily, like, as far as modern horror goes, those are the two I always go to first.
Yeah.
There's certainly other great films that come out over the last 10, 20 years
Well,
in terms of horror for sure. But
I'm looking at your background right now. You've got 3 Blu-rays set up. We already
Yeah,
talked
I
about
do.
Nope. We talked about The Witch, and of course, Hereditary was on Variety's list. But if it were up to me to pick an Ari Aster film somewhere, it would be Midsommar.
yeah. Yeah, that's very fair. Midsommar, I would probably, that's a more consistent film for me for sure.
I'm with
Even
you.
though I think Hereditary might have higher highs for me, but
It's a
it doesn't-
scarier film, like maybe not even consistently. It
Yeah.
just has more of those individual peaks that are truly frightening.
what about Under the Skin? Does that qualify here?
Good question.
Because if that qualifies, that immediately jumps to mind for me.
That's a good point. I have personally mostly seen that as more of a sci-fi film than a horror film, but we've
Okay.
seen many examples where sci-fi and horror do make a perfect marriage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Alien is a great horror film, as we just talked about. It topped both of our top 10s, but
Mhm.
that movie is just as much a great horror film as it is a great sci-fi film.
Yeah.
It has both, and in a lot of ways, you can argue that Under the Skin also has both. So
Yeah.
maybe it should qualify.
Yeah, I just wondered because, like, tonally, it does get kind of bleak in places, and certainly
I mean-
invokes some panic. And
Mika Levy's score certainly turns it into a horror film.
you think about the score, yes.
I mean, we just got done
Absolutely.
talking about The Shining, maybe being in our top 20, but without the
Yeah.
music for that film, that's not really a horror film anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's very fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say, like, as far as recent films,
hmm
at least, thinking off the cuff here, those are the ones
Yeah.
that come to mind the most, I guess.
hmm hmm
Yeah, I can't really think of anything. I'd have to really, kind of dig in and think about it a little bit further. But yeah, I mean, a lot of, when I'm thinking about the best horror films of all time,
Yeah.
a lot of what is listed in the top 100 are films that I would consider for my list. 'Cause,
I would
I
too.
mean, obviously,
too.
all of my films are on here in one way or another. So,
You got to
it's just a
watch
matter
Cure.
of-
I really want to see what
Yeah.
you think of Cure. I'm genuinely surprised that was not in Variety's list. Like I really am.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know why they decided to leave it out. I don't know. If
Maybe
there's
they
an
didn't
answer to
classify it
that,
as horror to them.
maybe they didn't.
It is a serial killer thriller as well. but I think it is just as much a horror film as something like The Silence of the Lambs. So if you make that argument, in fact, I think it's more of a horror film than The Silence of the Lambs as far as what we define horror as traditionally.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing, and we talked about this before the break, but like the one thing I really do like about this list is how they define horror.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily look at Manhunter or Silence of the Lambs as horror, as, something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Alien, even The Thing.
Right.
Certainly horror components of it. And something I love about M and maybe similar to even The Zone of Interest is you think about just the bubbling underbelly of those two films.
Yeah.
And the horror components there. Like, I do kind of love how eclectic this is. And then you have something like Godzilla on this list, which I love.
Yeah.
If I'm considering that horror, that is probably that might even be in my top 20, honestly. That 1954 Godzilla, I do really love. But that's another film you don't necessarily think of as conventional horror.
Right.
Because it's built as this spectacle. But what those characters experience is obviously going to be horrific. So I just love the range. Like they made it extremely broad. So there's all kinds of films on here.
Yeah.
That makes it really refreshing to see, I think. So
Absolutely. I think of a few others that maybe should be considered. I mean, maybe not should be, but we just had a recent conversation some months ago now, after the release of M. Night Shyamalan's Trap and how many of his early films are being reevaluated. And I still think outside of The Sixth Sense, which did make this list, movies like Signs and The Village, I still think have horror qualities to them.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Like both of those films, I was going to say the Village especially, but then I started to retract that statement because I think both of them in their own ways. I think the horror components of The Village might be a little bit more visceral, especially in the early half of that film when the creatures are more of a mystery and like the way that film is shot, the panic and the urgency that we see with the characters, it's quite visceral.
It is.
There's a lot of buildup in Signs. Like a lot of the horror is built off of how mystifying this is, how like the potential of what could go wrong is what's swirling in their minds. But they don't really see it up close until the end of that film, right? So there's just a lot of built up. So in different ways, but I would agree with you that they both have horror components for sure.
Honestly, I'm looking at this list of mine now. We sort of joked about this up front, JD, that we might be making some real-time changes as we think about this.
Yeah.
If there is one real-time change I might consider maybe shifting into my top 10, I mentioned how much I do slightly prefer Repulsion to Rosemary's Baby, the Roman Polanski films. But there is something so inherently troubling about Rosemary's Baby that it's hard to shake that movie as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't feel comfortable putting two Roman Polanski films in my top 10, especially given not just the subject matter of those two films, but how they mirror the subject matter of the man himself.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate.
But man, those films are so effective. I think in many ways, Rosemary's Baby was maybe it's sort of like the other side of the influence of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because I think of how that movie was so influential to nearly every horror movie that came out afterwards, right? Rosemary's Baby is sort of the same thing, but for more of like the more modern take on emotional horror that A24 is capitalizing on.
Yes.
Like in many ways, that's kind of like the earliest example of that very thing, the horrific drama, as we might call it. And that's just as influential, just in its own way, that I might shift that somewhere in my top 10 and just say I have two Polanski films, but I still think he's a garbage man.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, he's the ultimate separating the art from the artist.
You have to. You have to.
He's one of
he's
the
made
worst humans.
yeah, take away the man. I think he was one of the best filmmakers working at that time. Certainly knew how to provoke an audience.
Yeah, for sure. Great films. I will not deny that as well. It is extremely unfortunate that it comes from one of the worst human beings.
I know.
But the movies are great. Absolutely.
They're so good. They're so good.
It's understandable. It's understandable. And again, I think that's where this conversation is fun for me because I don't have to be married to this list.
I'm not. I'm not. I'm married to my top 4. I know I'm married to my top 4.
Same. Yeah. I mean, but again, I'm not going to sit here and be like, if you don't have Alien as number 1 on your list, you might as well go to hell.
You might as well go to hell.
I'm not going to
might as well get Sam Raimi on the phone and drag you to hell.
Yeah. If you don't even if you don't think Alien is great, you don't even have to like Alien. I'm still going to be willing to engage in a conversation with you about it. I'd be curious. In fact, that might make me even more open-minded because I don't know if I know anyone that thinks Alien is bad. So
I know, right?
If you don't like Alien and think it's not a good movie, I'd be so curious as to hear your thoughts. Well, I want to know how you came to that conclusion.
Let's play this game a little bit and see if we can provoke an audience or provoke a reaction from our audience. Rather, are there any movies in Variety's top 100 that you personally don't really care for?
Yeah, please let me know because I'd be extremely curious.
No, I'm asking you. Are there any that you? Yeah, I'm asking you directly, JD. Are there any in the list that you don't care for?
Oh boy, I haven't gone through the whole list in great detail as far as that perspective is concerned. I don't know. I mean, there's certainly plenty here that are blind spots for me.
Yeah, and we should know that.
That was maybe my biggest takeaway from anything else. And I've seen a lot of these films.
Same. I've seen most of them.
There's certainly, quite a few here that are blind spots. So of the films that I have seen, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I don't love them.
Okay, I love that first one. That first one is surprisingly artful and surreal, but I think most of them are. And
that's what I was going to say. And I feel like we've had this conversation before, especially when it comes to slashers. I think the first films are often very good, if not great. But the rest of those films, like the sequels that come after in a lot of these slasher franchises, I equate to how a lot of people talk about Marvel these days and how they find Marvel to be a sludge, hollow, repetitive. That's how I feel about the slasher genre. A lot of them. There might be fun to be had in the same ways that I might have fun with, Ant-Man 2.
Well, yeah, I think the exception to that rule, as far as slasher films are concerned, maybe it's the Friday the 13th saga, which I think the best ones are when it actually got goofy and silly. The fact that I think Jason X, when he goes to space, is one of the best ones, I think is maybe saying something about that. Actually, I think the best Jason movie is Freddy versus Jason. I think that might be the best one they ever made.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I typically don't tend to care for many.
Yeah, you don't connect with that as much.
I don't connect to them. I find them hollow and vacuous. And I don't see, I would talk about them the same way a lot of people talk about Marvel now.
Sure.
I just, a lot of it is an exercise in empty thrill, which is fine. If people like that, all the power to you. I just don't find any value in it for me. But usually the first films that spark those franchises, they are born out of something extremely creative.
Sure. Yeah.
And thoughtful and artistically, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Artistically intuitive. So like that first Nightmare on Elm Street, the first Halloween, Candyman, I really like all of those films. Like the first
Same.
films and all
Same.
of those franchises, I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm.
The first Saw movie, I think, is really great with what it's trying to accomplish. But then
Okay.
the rest of them, like, they just take the seed of an idea and it just becomes a cash grab after that. And it's just not for me at that point. You know, like
that's fair.
Like
That's
you
fair.
noted with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the incessant reboots we get.
I know.
None of them match the quality of that first film.
I think it's so funny that Tobe Hooper himself directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which was a complete tonal reversal from that first film. It's a
Yeah.
straight up comedy.
Yeah.
It's a straight up
Yeah.
comedy that he made.
So yeah, as far as films, I don't like, but like none of those films are here though.
No,
Like-
no, they're not. They're not. But yeah. I mean, there are some that were on this list, Variety's list specifically, that I'm admittedly not in love with like other people are. And a lot of these do have their own sort of cult followings. I mean, The Wicker Man has a massive cult following, and I'm not in love
Yeah.
with that original Wicker Man all that much. At number 17 was the French horror thriller Diabolique, which I admittedly saw in the worst circumstances, sort of knowing the ending before I even got a chance to watch the movie, and that admittedly maybe affected my experience negatively. So that's more on me than it is the movie, and I'm willing to admit that. But there are a few that I know a lot of people do hold in high regard that they're just not quite there for me. But a good chunk of these I do love, and it was a fun exercise to go through all these for sure.
Yeah, the only one on this list, again, I'm trying to go through this in real time, but like
Yeah.
of the films listed here, the only one, really the only one of those I've seen, again, there are a few blind spots that could change as I catch up with some of these, but
Mm-hmm.
of the ones I've seen, the only one on here that I don't quite love is Raw.
I don't love that
Um,
either. That's a
I
good
don't
point.
love that film.
I was thinking about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only one that I'm like I'm quite mixed on that film, or at least I don't find it to be as robust as others find it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really the only one. And again, like maybe my pushback with Hereditary,
Mm-hmm.
like I would not have that in my top 50, perhaps.
Same.
Because of that last 20 minutes or so. I especially am going to push back at it being at 36.
Me
I
too.
would not have it that high.
I'm not a fan of that movie in general.
But I think a lot of that film is great until it's not.
That's fair. That's
So,
fair. I mean, sometimes a terrible ending can really tank everything else that came before, and sometimes it's not. 'Cause, we often talk about movies being the sum of their parts, and we can often overlook a pretty mediocre or even lukewarm third act if everything leading up to it was really great.
Sure.
But there's something about the conclusive nature of Hereditary that makes me retroactively like everything else less about it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen very often. But that's one of those films that sadly falls into that trap for me.
Yeah. And I'm also like real high. I know we somewhat mentioned it earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
and again, I didn't really rank anything outside of my top 10,
Mm-hmm.
but films that would very much be fighting for that 11 through 20 space. Like I really like those original monster movies. Like Frankenstein, I think is really, really great.
Frankenstein's amazing. Bride of Frankenstein might be. Some people say it's better. I think it's just as good at the very least.
Yeah, it's really great. Another one that I love as well is The Invisible Man. That
movie's hilarious.
original-
That movie is so
it's
funny.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little bit like Get Out in that way, where it's
kind of
it's
is,
horror
yeah.
and comedy is a great
But
mixture.
but it's not the kind of comedy that like it wasn't goofy. Like it was actually kind of like mean spirited and cynical,
Yeah.
which I really like about it.
And its effects are extremely great for 1933.
I
Like, they
agree.
hold up really well.
I absolutely agree.
So I really like that one a lot as well. So I mean that's very much up there.
Mhm.
I don't really have too much of an issue with Variety's list here, other than I would push back against some of the ranking of them.
Mhm.
But And I would include
really
a few
like
others.
Yeah, I really like most of these films, though.
Yeah.
It's not enough to get me, as you mentioned the discourse earlier. I don't have that kind of energy
No.
for this kind of list.
No. And the other thing, too, that we haven't really talked about, at least not in depth here, and I don't know if we have time at this point. We are going kind of long, but it's interesting the definition of what they consider to be horror, because
Yeah.
if I was to say, hey, we're going to include Jaws in this, like, would that influence your top 10 or top 20 at all?
It probably would.
Yeah.
I could see that making it into my top 10 if I were to really emphasize the horror of that. And that's not to say, like, I don't think Jaws, I think it's a scary movie. I do think it's a very frightening movie. I don't lump it into the same categorization as horror as most of these others that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's perfectly fair.
Yeah.
I can concede to that same criteria. But if we are going to include Jaws, that's probably in my top 10. Probably in my, or very at the very least, it's fighting heavily for a spot there. So
Yeah, it would. I'd probably put it just under Carrie or something like that.
yeah,
Like maybe like
Pretty
in
much
my
up there.
8 through 10 somewhere.
yeah. Same thing with M. Like, I didn't really consider M as much, but that is very much in that conversation.
Yeah.
Manhunter is a masterpiece for me. I love it. It is my favorite Michael Mann. And if I was considering that more for this exercise, then that's also going to be heavily in the conversation. But I did leave them out for similar-ish reasons, though.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
So,
And the same with something like Michael Haneke's Funny Games. Which kind of falls more into that domestic thriller route for me. But even though it is a very unsettling and creepy movie, but if I were to give it more of a literal definition of horror behind it, I might give that one. That's one I might at least consider a little bit more. Still wouldn't crack my top 10, but I might at least think about it more.
Yeah, and that's where the conversation gets real interesting, right? Because does unsettling and creepy count as horror? And if it does, that does expand the criteria quite a bit, I think, because there are a lot of films that are unsettling, that are creepy, that might work more as a thriller than they do as a horror. And making that distinction probably does help, condense the kinds of films you're looking for with a list like this.
I mean, yeah, by that I guess definition, what about something like I don't love this film. I think you like it more than I do, but what about something like Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah, that's a great example. I do really like that film. I think it is bleak. It is unsettling. Is it horror? I can't quite.
It was nominated at the Saturn Awards for Best Horror Film when it came out in 2000.
I could see it. It is pretty horrific in many regards, but not obviously not in a conventional sense. But I could understand that argument there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It kind of goes back to the zone of interest. Like the zone of interest is very unsettling, very creepy, and disturbing. Does that qualify as horror though?
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it does.
Maybe.
Like in a Night of the Hunter kind of way, it could. But again, it kind of, it raises some interesting questions in that regard.
For sure.
Like Zodiac even.
Oh,
like
yeah,
Zodiac kind of crosses into that, like, this is kind of thrilling. It's unsettling, but it's not really horror.
Even Seven, maybe?
7? Yeah, sure.
I mean, I would say, like, I kind of think 7 is more quote-unquote horror than something like The Silence of the Lambs in many ways, just given the urban grime of it. I think like that dirty, kind of grungy aesthetic actually makes it feel more like a horror film, even though they're both serial killer cop thrillers in many ways. Like there's a lot you can do with your setting to make people believe you're actually watching a horror film. And that's another great example of that.
Yeah. And obviously we could keep going. I think for the sake of time, we'll end it there. But that was a fun conversation. I very much did enjoy that. Let us know what your top 10 horror movies are. Do you agree, disagree with anything we had to say here? We would love to know. leave a comment below. If you're watching here on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com as well. Just a reminder, I believe we noted earlier in this conversation, we have 2 reviews coming out this week. We are going to talk about Saturday Night.
Yeah.
Everyone has clearly seen the film, so you'll know what we're talking about. But we're going to give a review for Saturday Night, and then we're also going to talk about the animated documentary Piece by Piece, which I did not expect. I don't know if this happened to you, but it certainly happened to me.
I think I know you were going with this.
They played the Wicked trailer, and it was all in Lego. I had no idea that was going to happen. I was totally caught off guard.
And it actually made me think, oh, this movie now looks good all of a sudden.
I just want to see the Lego version.
That's all I want to see. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah. It was maybe better than the movie I went to go and see that day.
Exactly. They should just create a Lego version for every movie, really. Just give us 2 options, okay?
And like an actual recreation, not like a like how they did like the Lego Star Wars holiday special or something like that. Like recreate, I don't know, recreate Misery with Legos or something like that.
Could you imagine? That'd be really fun. I would pay to see that.
I would pay to see that. I'd pay $100 to see that. You kidding me?
Yeah, I know. So if you're listening, Lego, I think we have a new opportunity for you.
$1 million idea.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to talk about those 2 films this week. There's going to be a new Chasing the Gold. There's going to be a new Women in Session as well. We did not get to Chasing the Gold last week, but there was a really fascinating Women in Session episode from last week that I definitely urge people to go and check out. Kristen and Jaylon, they had a guest on the show, Athena, and they talked about Scream and Halloween. They wanted to compare and contrast those 2 horror franchises, kind of pit them up against each other. It ended up turning into a really fascinating conversation where they didn't just talk about those 2 franchises. They talked about horror broadly speaking, why these films resonate, and kind of what they mean and how they evolve over the years. It was a really thoughtful conversation that I really, really enjoyed, that I definitely encourage people to go and check out. I thought it was fantastic. So with all of that said, I think that's everything, Brendan.
I think so.
Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I can't wait to watch some of these horror movies again. I think I'm going to have to try and show my wife some of these. And she hates horror movies, which means we're going to have to watch them during the day, which is the worst time, in my opinion, to watch these. But she's willing to give them a go this horror season, if you will. I'm excited for that, and just want to shout her out. I love my wife. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary as we are today,
cool.
which is really
very
exciting.
Yeah, love that for you guys.
Thank you.
See, this time of year is always really difficult because my time is so limited because of my kids and everything we're up to. So
yeah, you are a dad.
Throughout the week, I'm catching up on new release films that we are considering for year-end awards stuff, whether it be Critics' Choice or for InSession Film purposes. So I don't really have a lot of time to watch anything outside of 2024 stuff. You know, because there's the new stuff that's coming out, but there's also a lot I missed throughout the year because of that the same limitation.
And there's a lot of good stuff out there.
I'm catching up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to catch all of the new stuff. So, going into the awards voting, I feel well-rounded on the year. So this time of year is always really difficult for me to catch up. So
for sure,
even though it's not the season, I'm probably going to try to catch up with a lot of these movies once we get to like February, late January, February into March.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to have to get out the Halloween decorations in February, recreate the season spiritually myself.
You're changing the date. You're getting rid of Valentine's Day and turning it into Halloween.
I'm going to turn exactly. February is going to be the new Halloween for me.
Who needs Valentine's Day? The world needs Halloween more than Valentine's Day.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to celebrate Halloween twice.
There you go. That's
is
great.
kind of the moral of the story there. Because I do want to
love
catch
it.
up with a lot of these as well.
Yeah.
But I'm probably going to have to do it in February. So that'll be my goal for 2025 as we move into the new year. So my last final thought, quick dad thought here real quick.
Oh, it's just adorable.
My son had his flag football game tonight. It's been about a month since they've played because we've had a lot of rain. We obviously had the hurricane last week.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad
a lot of
everyone's
his
okay, by
games-
the way.
Yeah, everyone's great here. We didn't really have too much of an issue here in South Florida.
Yeah.
However, because it's been about a month, I wasn't exactly sure how he'd do. And Sam tonight, no hyperbole. I might be maybe a little biased, but I don't think it's too much hyperbole. He was the best player on his team tonight.
Oh, good.
He
good,
was
good.
fantastic. He had 4 or 5 tackles on defense. He had 2 runs on offense as a running back that set up the only touchdown his team scored in this game tonight.
That's great.
He was all over the field. He was a monster on both sides of the ball. I was extremely proud of him, and I just had to shut him out.
Where do you see him landing as far as what position if he were to take up football more seriously as he gets a little bit older?
Well, if
Do you
wants
see him
to
as
take
more of a defensive player, more of a special teams participant, more running back as you're talking about?
That's a really good question. I mean, for one, if we're going to take football more seriously as he gets older, we're going to have to convince Mama that it's okay.
Oh,
That's going to be another conversation.
We're not talking about that part because that's totally understandable.
Yeah. But if we are able to convince her to let him play, it's a great question because he's small. He's on the smaller side, so he's not going to play linebacker or lineman or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Could he be a good safety? I could see him being a good safety. He's very athletic, quick.
Maybe
on the
a good
offensive
tight end?
side, no, I think he's too small for that.
You think he's too small for that? Okay.
Yeah, unless he grows into it, but at this point, he's too small for that.
He could be a kicker.
He could always be a kicker, yeah. I think on offense, he'd make for a good running back. He's very shifty, very quick. We'd have to work on his feet, but I think he'd be...
But he's got the agility there at least.
He's got the agility.
The evidence is there.
And that's what he demonstrated tonight was that agility.
Okay.
Like he had 2 incredibly shifty runs that got him into scoring territory that they wouldn't have scored without those runs. So
Gotcha.
he did extremely well. And
Good for him.
I was so proud of him. Yeah.
Proud of him. Proud of you. Proud of him as well.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Horror. It's good. It's good.
Leatherface rules.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Also good.